And now let's get into this interview. Let's get into this interview. All right, tell me what the volume's like.
G'day guys, Ziggy D here. I'm here again with Chris Wilson.
Hey.
Thank you very much for taking some more time to talk to me.
You're welcome.
I wanted to talk about this whole 10-act system and get some divine design insights into it. I'm just going to roll with that. I'm not editing that out.
You're like those community guys with their memes.
Divine design insights with Chris Wilson. It's time. The whole 10-act system. Before this 3.0 announcement, you were talking about identifying an issue in the action RPG genre and addressing that. How do you feel, what is that issue firstly, and how do you feel like this 10-act system is addressing it?
Traditionally, action RPGs like Diablo 1, 2, Path of Exile, for example, have required that you play through the game several times before you reach whatever the end game is.
It's essentially a trope now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of the New Game Plus and New Game Plus Plus systems that are used in other types of games. And so, for a very long time, players are happy to have additional content to play, right? Like if Path of Exile finished at the end of normal, then there would be less of a game than if there was the ability to play through and see how your character fares against super hard versions of Sandspitters from the beach. And there's the problem. You're playing through stuff that's kind of designed to be early in the game.
Yeah.
And there's a thing where people say, I want Crawl to be incredibly hard when you start off because, you know, there needs to be a difficulty jump. Well, the AI of the monsters is just laughably cheap, right? Like it's designed so that the Sandspitter moves around and occasionally shoots you and the zombie kind of wanders around and, you know, doesn't hit you because he's a zombie. You know, it's designed to be the beginning of the game, not halfway through the game. And so
one quick thing I will jump in there. I agree with everything so far, and I do agree with future statements, but you can, just devil's advocate, you can just make the AI more intelligent. I know that's something they did do with Diablo, where they just made it that when you went back into the next act, then the AI became more difficult, and to be fair, in Path of Exile itself, you then start encountering more mods on the rares and the champion packs, so there is some difficulty increase. But
the problem that people found was it kind of just isn't really that fun to replay certain parts of this. You know, of course, there's the awesome bits like the Dried Lake, where totally happy to get to the Dried Lake again and do some more farming, but a lot of the game really needed to be different if you're playing it a second time. And in addition, from a retention point of view, we know that when we get players into the Atlas, we own that player's soul, right? Like they're ours basically. Their income's basically tithed to the company after that point. You know, we're sorted out. And for the existing playthrough, at the beginning, we have no retention issues of people playing through the storyline. The story is compelling, and while some people don't finish the game for whatever reason, it's certainly not the same as when they're playing through the second and third difficulties, which were just a repeat. In fact, there's a point in the graph where you finish the first playthrough, and you get to the second, and you say, wait, what? I have to do this again? And some percentage of people leave. Now, despite...
Yeah, I know a lot of people have done that. I've got a few friends who freaked out when they've gone, oh, that was it, feels bad, man. And I do get that complaint a lot as a streamer, where people come in and just like, oh, is this it? Like, what the fuck? So yeah, no, this is definitely a real issue, and this is why, personally, I'm really for the whole 10-act thing, because for new players, people who are new to the genre, there definitely is this thing of they finish Malachi, they then take the portal in Act 4, and it's just like, oh, okay, shit, so.
Despite this, the game grew in popularity and was very successful, and that's all well and good, but it was certainly a leak. You know, it's a hole that we had to fix. And different games have tried to do this in different ways. As you know, Diablo 3 has adventure mode, and they do not have multiple difficulty levels that you play through. They have a dynamic difficulty system where you can kind of tailor it to your character, and they have some scaling and so on. We didn't want to do that, and so we have done the 6 acts in this release, which increased the game's size to 10 acts before the end game. And this is the thing we were referring to a while ago when we said there's a problem with the traditional action RPG tropes that we wanted to address. And the example we gave at the time was like the flask system, where Diablo 2 has potions that you buy from the shop, and it's a bit spammy having to buy them.
Before he goes like seriously into the whole flask thing, just to backtrack a little bit, I will agree that I'm really glad they didn't do the whole adventure mode system. The issue that I have with adventure mode in D3, and I know Scaff, who's a dude in my chat, an absolute idiot in my chat, who has this issue of you actually want to go back and play the campaign, but the problem is whenever you make like alternate infinite levels, endless ledge style leveling systems, it's nearly always infinitely more efficient than going through the campaign. So you feel bad going through the campaign because it's inefficient, and it just becomes you never use it for leveling, and it just becomes an entire portion of the content which is never touched upon. People always rage and say, oh, but you can always do it if you want to, but that is stupid. Players always pick the path of least resistance. So yeah.
Them and they're kind of homogeneous and similar, and so we went with flasks that refill, whereas other games have done different things like stacking potions or red balls that you have to run over on the ground or regen and so on. And so all the games handle it in different ways, and this is our way to have a 10-act playthrough where the second 5 acts are entirely fan service, where you revisit reminiscent stuff from the past and find out what happened to it.
Do you think that particular decision will help with player retention, that you're returning but that it's a bit different this time around?
Well, on one hand, it doesn't feel the same to play through as you've played through yourself. I mean, pretty much the moment that's most similar is, I guess, you're in like the Mudflats, which is a visually similar zone the 2 times, apart from the new architecture, but the monsters are different. And pretty much everything else after that point has a very different tone to it, right? There's both the god hunting aspects of it, and there's the fact that you're going completely different paths. You're constantly in this playthrough finding kind of blocked areas where, oh, I could go through them before, but what do I have to do now? And finding other ways around. But in addition, there's the fan service thing, where if you enjoyed the story or even just the existence of the first half of the game, then the second half kind of answers all the questions. Where is Nessa? What do the town people say about her? Oh, she's looking for the Star of Rayclast. That's
basically rip Nessa, which feels bad, man. I think we all kind of like, oh shit, Nessa. The spoiler, everyone thinks that the Brine King, who has the mermaid thing on its head, everyone thinks that's like Nessa's been transformed, because if you look at it, she has like a bag over her shoulder and it's like the same red strap that Nessa has or something. So rip. Also, I love how like pre-set up that exchange was. Oh, but what? Anyway. Yeah.
That's not going to go well for her. When will I see her again? You know, and there's Nessa throughout the act in various different places. And the idea of, you know, Chevron, who created Brutus, saying, oh, you made my guy go to pieces, so I'm going to put him back together and we're going to get you at the top of my tower. And this kind of stuff, where you get to kind of hear about things in the first playthrough and then experience them in the second. And the lore of the uniques and so on plays into, you know, situations that you get to encounter. And so we feel that it is much more than just 6 new acts from the point of view of it lets you actually like fulfill things that you've heard about in the past.
So it's all well and good to say that, yeah, we're going to add 6 acts to bring it to 10 acts to solve this problem of the action RPG genre, but how do you actually manage that?
This is through, our company's core DNA is about clever reuse of content, right?
That's action RPGs, isn't it?
Right. But we basically, when we sat down at the beginning, there were 3 of us, and we said the only way that we're going to make this using our, you know, meager life savings is to find clever ways to reuse content. You know, the level generation stuff has to be extreme. The items have to be incredibly deep. There has to be a lot of stuff without having to actually just mass make an entirely large-scale game.
Yeah.
It seems stupid, but I really like just these trees. And I like the different rock face. It does genuinely feel like a pretty different kind of zone. And it's stupid that just the subtle difference. Are these trees in the climb? And I don't know, I like the way they like play the shadows across the floor and stuff. It just looks cool. And yeah, double dipping content.
Now, since that point, we've sunk tens of millions of dollars into mass large-scale games, so there is a lot of content there, but the immense amount of ways that you revisit it, like, you know, every tile set is used several different times throughout the game, and then there's map versions of it, and there's arenas, and, you know, there's a Leo fight, you know, sorry, a Vegan fight is in, you know, a certain tile set and so on. There's so much reuse of stuff, and this, you know, the leagues, for example, we make a league, and then we get to use it as potentially a race, and we get to use it as Zana mod, and Sextants, and map mods, and Legacy League, all sorts of things. And so when making these 6 acts, we're making these 5 acts, I should say, because Act 5 is entirely new content. So the additional 5 acts here are a very clever remix of the existing stuff that we have, where in some cases, things that we created for Atlas of Worlds, we've also intended to be used here. So we get the ability to take a twist on an Atlas map. The beacon, for example, is an example there. And so there are places where we get to double dip various content that we've made for elsewhere in the game and use it in an interesting way here. But the mandate for the team has basically been do this in the most cost-effective way, because if we apply everything we've learned over the last decade, then it is entirely possible for us to make 5 acts in the time that would normally take to make 1 or 2. And then over the last couple of years in parallel, we've been working on this, and it's all coming together now.
So how did...
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely see it just sort of going back and looking at this bit. Like, you can really see how different that looks to everything else and how it just kind of looks like stuff from Atlas. Like, the whole Atlas thing, you can tell that this was like well planned in advance, and yeah, the people saying that, oh, it's just going to look exactly the same as everything else, it's going to be really boring. You know, you can just sort of look at the boss fights and stuff, and you can sort of tell it's Act 2, but it's different enough that it should be fine. Like, we haven't seen it yet in entirety, but we should be
You're
alright.
ensure then that this didn't just become what some people fear as like reskins of the previous acts, and that it actually felt significantly different while taking advantage of that like skill of reusing things.
So, when we were initially planning this, I suspect we wanted it to be more of an initial reskin, right? The initial scope is the minimum amount required to make it so that it's interesting to play through the areas again. And the team have delivered so much more than that it worries me. Like, playing through, I am amazed on a daily basis at the subtlety of the stuff and how cool it is to like go into Act 2 and then back out again because of the fact that they worked out that the road is open and all this stuff.
Yep.
And that only gets more crazy as we get further down this. So the team have gone above and beyond the initial mandate, right? Like we said, okay, no new monsters, just take the existing ones and use them in different ways, a few reskins, and they've made new monsters, right? Like there's so much.
They played Dark Souls, but I do really like this. I just like the grittiness of some of these new zones. There's it looks like it's kind of keeping with that really dark atmosphere of Path of Exile, and it's not going into just kind of like it's keeping like the atmosphere of some of the earlier zones and actually going kind of darker, it looks like, in some of the tile sets, which is nice. A lot of people worried that when we go to Act 5, we're going to an actual city that's lived in, not an abandoned ruin. Personally, I'm quite excited to actually see life, if that makes sense, in Path of Exile, because most of all of Act 1 to Act 4 is you're just going through the ruins of an empire. So now it's kind of like you get to go through the ruins of an empire, find an empire, fuck the empire up, go back to the ruins, come back, and then just destroy shit. So that I like.
Cool stuff that the team have put together for this to make sure that it does not feel repetitive. And there's kind of this feeling of fan service and joy as you find out about all these cool things. And I got to experience that myself because I've been working internally on spearheading the China project and working on overseeing business stuff and keeping a close eye on the itemization in Path of Exile, but not the creation of acts. I actually got to kind of save myself from having seen Acts 5 through 10 and only get to check them out recently when they're in a really good state. So I got the same feeling that you did a few days ago and the community did this week.
Awesome. So Act 5, has that been designed with this dual part system in mind? Because all the other ones you've kind of adapted to come back to and change the storylines, but Act 5 has been made at the same time. Was that like always the intention that you would have two parts of Act 5, returning Act 10?
There is a specific plot reason why you have to go back to Rayclast and why you're doing all of the god slaying and why you're working towards the point where you get to return to Oriath in Act 10 and finalize the fall of it. You know, there's plot stuff there that I don't want to spoil. And so when the team are designing Act 5, they're completely aware of the fact that there's also the 6 through 10 arc, and it means that we get to save some of the most awesome and impressive stuff for Act 10.
Ah, okay, so some of the stuff that you might have just put in Act 5 and kind of condensed it down, you've been able to spread out and bring out into a second version of it.
Absolutely, and planning that from the start was a lot better than finishing Act 5 and then saying, let's do another 5 and having to go and retcon a thing that's already finished and released.
Right.
Like, you know, if we take the beast fight from Act 4 and put it at the end of Act 10 and say, hey guys, you've already killed the beast, but we're moving it by 6 acts, that'll be a problem. So,
I mean, dude, Windows, man. Like, and it's a completely new aesthetic. That's kind of what I like about it when I say that we're going into an actual city rather than a ruin. Seeing the stuff while it's still built up, seeing the greats. It's kind of, I mean, it almost kind of has like a Victorian London vibe about it in a way. Like this it's so different. That's what's kind of nice about it. And yeah, I think that's just kind of cool.
We're not doing that. We're doing it with new content.
So what sort of, like, I know you don't want to spoil everything, but what sort of story can players expect to get out of this whole 10-act system?
There's an overarching story arc here that the players are gradually beginning to put together. And I say that by reading parts of different people's comments and assuming that there's one guy out there who's just reading those same parts and knows the entire story. Most of the information is there. And you'll notice that over the last few leagues, there have been a lot of uniques piled into the game that deal with gods, right? There are items themed around the various gods like Tukahama and Abarath and so on. And if you're careful and read a lot of flavor text and listen to a lot of story stones and stuff, you can put together quite a lot of the story. And then there's subtle clues, right? There's a symbol that's being used extensively throughout the game as of recently, which ties a lot of the stuff together. And yeah, it's pretty easy for people to gradually put it together. And we expect by the time they play it, they'll have their hopes. They'll have the hopes as to what they're going to see, and hopefully they'll be pleased with that.
Awesome stuff. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Cheers.
Oh, fucking Ziggy back at it again with the... He does the handshake, man. He's got that shit nailed. But, yeah. I don't know. I think it's pretty good. Nothing that new. Mostly kind of just a rehash of stuff we've sort of seen before. Kind of just a few little dressments, like just a little bit of window dressing onto it, but nothing completely fresh, you know? So, yeah, it's good. I feel like they probably could have tied the two together, because there wasn't anything that juicy in that one, so maybe they could have saved something for it. Oh well. But they have announced these new uniques, and people have gotten very excited about one and pretty meh about the others. So, yes. Now, we don't know how many other uniques we're going to have, and some people are kind of unsure about whether or not we're going to be getting... If we're going to get, like, a package of, like, 20 uniques, and if that's going to be including the updated threshold jewels or not. So we'll just have to see. But I do like how they are tying stuff around, you know, all the new content to come to keep building that hype for, you know, 3.0. So anyway. Tidebreaker doubles down on stuns, the specialty mechanic of mace base types, with an extremely wide margin for physical damage. There's a good chance you'll find a major blow on even high life monsters and be rewarded with an endurance charge for your efforts. The intelligence helps get around some of the attribute limitations that building for big stuns may impose, and hints at the relationship with the Brine King's crown. Right. So, I'm actually really surprised that they're building uniques which support stun, because stun as a mechanic is really problematic. It's either one of those things where it's either really, really good to the point where it just trivializes all of the content, or not good enough because it doesn't work on the content you want on. And hang on just quickly. From the League announcement, we're adding many single pieces of content to coincide with the release. This includes a set of 10 new threshold jewels, 16 powerful new unique items. And the emote says 10. Yeah, that's why I'm still a bit iffy. We have had some numbers thrown around, but some of them have kind of gone backwards on each other, so it's hard to say. But apparently 60 new unique weapons and armor. So far, we've only had 3 from the new one, so there should be 13 more. Okay. Or 7 more if it's only actually 10. So, undecided. So we should still have a few more to come. But, yeah, it's just kind of a weird... It's kind of a weird item. It's potentially powerful. The damage on it isn't insane. It has no crit chance. It does have 10% increased fizz damage per endurance charge. So if you did this on like a Juggernaut, you know, rock 10 endurance charges. Having 100% increased fizz built into there. It's pretty good. We don't know how high that stun threshold goes up to. We don't know how high that fizz roll is. This is one thing which really annoys me, is when they release items, I really wish they would release it with the max and minimum rolls. Because then we can actually be like, oh, this is a top roll one, it's really good, or this is a bottom roll one. There's been issues where they've like announced weapons before, and they've just shown them with like medium rolls, and you're like, I don't know, this could be good or not. But off the bat, I think this is a kind of underwhelming item, but I'm sure there'll be some shenanigans where it becomes ridiculous because you just stun lock everything. I don't know. Not that exciting though. I do like that it has int, because that does help with stat requirements, but whatever. Martyr of Innocence has a much clearer link with the Eye of Innocence amulet's counterpart. Found at its base type level, Martyr of Innocence is a decent fire weapon. Once you can build around Eye of Innocence, Martyr becomes far more fearsome, allowing you to rapidly burn through your opponent's life. The presence of a built-in Vengeance helps eke out a little more damage for the more defensively orientated staff builds. So again, I like that they're releasing thematically linked items which have clear synergies with one another. I'm always kind of fearful when you push it too much, because then you always end up in like a D3 system of you have to wear this set of items, and the second you start wearing sets, then you start really limiting your options and your choices. But in Path of Exile, it's usually kind of like these 2, maybe 3 at most items have synergy, so we're kind of fine. This is another item which I'm not really sure about, but it maybe has some potential. So off the bat, it has a crit chance of 6.5. So you could maybe do some crit related stuff with it. But anyway. So it has like no fizz damage. It has a lot of fire damage. And that's why that crit, you know, maybe you could try and throw it into an Inquisitor. Maybe, but it's kind of awkward with the rest of the stuff on it. So it adds a bunch of fire damage to spells, but also has a bunch of just fire damage built in. So it's a slightly confused item. It has like one good attack stat and then one good caster stat. It then gives you 100% increased fire damage if you've been hit recently. So that's obviously really powerful, which means you kind of want to be playing a tanky character which just, stands in the middle of things. So like an RF build, something built around block cap, just like a high regen armor tank kind of character. Then damage penetrates 15% of fire res if you've blocked recently. This is really awkward as a mechanic because, again, obviously if you were doing anything Inquisitor related, then that becomes terrible. You are using a staff, so you're not converting your fire damage to chaos, so your damage is staying as fire. This isn't really going to give you more damage than something like a Searing Touch or a +3. So in that sense, for spellcasters, I don't think it's that good of a weapon. I think you'd probably be wanting to go more down the attack route. And it also has Vengeance built into it, which kind of is obviously kind of shitty on a spellcaster, so obviously a lot better on an attack-based build, but none of it really supports that. It has really bad attack speed. It's just kind of a confused item, I think. And having to be hit recently to get your damage ramping is awkward for boss content, obviously. Most bosses you purposely don't want to get hit because they'll just one-shot you, or you just one-shot them before they can even move. So most of the time that isn't active. And then only having the fire pen active if you've blocked recently on something which only has 18% base block in a world with nerfed roomies is kind of awkward. It's just kind of a weird item. Yes, it has incredibly good synergy with Eye of Innocence. So when you link it with Eye of Innocence, then it becomes much more of a usable item. But Eye of Innocence is already incredibly niche. So you're taking an incredibly niche build and then adding another very niche item to it. And that is just kind of odd for me. It will probably turn up in a Reddit build, but outside of that, it's just a little bit underwhelming in my opinion. And then this is the one which everyone's gotten really hyped about. I think it's a powerful item, but I'm still not like crazy in love with it. The bird god Garakan will be making his unique debut with these boots. Garakan's flight rewards movement and dexterity with lots and lots of life. I think they meant to say life regen, because anyway. And lets you ignore elemental ground effects. But without mobility, a significant portion of the power from these boots is lost. No resistance and meager life, that's why I think they meant to say life regen there. Without investment means you can quickly go from a bird god to sitting duck. Some people are telling me that 15 plus 18, 33 block chance is PogChamp in the previous item. Even so, even with your boosted block chance, getting it to a higher amount, it still seems like 33% block chance on this. It's still an awkward item because the times where you need your damage is against scary content. Like, you can face roll maps with this, right? So say it's a 33% block chance thing. That's slightly better than a shield. So let's say it's 33% block chance, right? To get the active benefit, to actually get good damage with it, you need to have been hit and you need to have blocked. And this is just really bad for anything boss related. So because of that, I just don't think it's that great. I just don't think it's that great. CI builds aren't really going to want to use it because if you're going to be doing block CI, you'd rather use something like Zergil's Crank. So you've already shelled out a massive market because CI doesn't want to touch it. So then it's just a life thing. And it's just incredibly niche. It's niche. And I personally don't think this is powerful enough to build so into, if that makes sense. If this gave 500% increased fire damage, sure, that shit's fucking broken insane. It's worth being gimmicky. But in a world where they're eventually removing double dipping, then having 100% increased fire damage if you've been hit recently, when you think about how much that scales your ignite, yeah, it's really PogChamp. But in a world without double dipping, it's just kind of, I don't know. But yeah. So these are the boots that everyone's really hyped over. So increased evasion rating, 30% increased movement speed. Very important that it's 30% increased movement speed. A lot of interesting items have come out recently with only 20%, and it's just like, I'm not going to use 20% pair of movement speed boots. Immune to burning, shocks, and chilled ground. That's huge. Like, that is what makes this a good item. You then get 100 life per second while moving. That, again, is very juicy, but that also makes it very niche. Obviously, if you're a Varpact build, this does nothing. And a lot of right side of tree evasion builds tend to go Varpact. And this is a item which is clearly designed around right side of tree evasion stacking, that kind of atmosphere. So it's kind of awkward. It's incredibly powerful for trappers. Trappers, miners, totem builds doing right side of tree. Of anything which can't leech, it obviously becomes even more powerful because it just gives them a massive boost to their life regen. And also, a lot of the right side of tree builds, they often float around, like, the non-Varpact ones, they tend to get about 3.6% life regens. They're in this awkward state where they actually slightly degen on Blood Rage. Well, if you have these, then obviously that's no longer an issue. So it does fit a lot of the non-Varpact builds, but it's still a little bit kind of, Now, the +1 life per 10 dexterity is a very odd stat to me, because this is what people are getting hyped on. People are like, oh my god, dude, you play some like Iron Commander build with these boots, and it's like fucking insane. And it's like, well, is it actually that insane? So, with the most extreme examples, like the most extreme examples is some kind of like Iron Commander builds. Now, Iron Commander builds, what most people do is they go full meme and they try and get like 1k dexterity, maybe, 1300 dexterity. But to do that, you gimp your character really hard. The realistic ones go for about 800-ish dex. Now, a realistic Iron Commander build can get good levels of defense, like very strong levels of defense, with about 800 dexterity. Now, you then, if you're using these, you obviously want to use something like the Shaper's Touch with it. You get a bunch of life for dex from Shaper's Touch. Now, what you need to keep in mind is even with 800 dexterity, which is a very large investment, these only give you 80 life. So you have to have 800 dexterity to get 80 life on a pair of boots which have no resists. You're going to be using these with Shaper's Touch, which don't have resists. So that's 2 slots locked. Now, you kind of want to be using something like the Perfect Form, if the Perfect Form still exists past Legacy. Obviously, in Legacy, there'll be Breach, so you'll be able to get hold of the Perfect Form. The Perfect Form gives you 10% increased dexterity, which is obviously pretty powerful for these kinds of builds, but that has minus 30 cold res. So you're already at 3 slots, which don't have resists and actually give you negative resists. And then if you're doing an Iron Commander build, you're then using a bow and, something like a drill neck, most likely. And the drill neck doesn't have resists. So your quiver doesn't have resists, your boots don't have resists, your gloves don't have resists, and your chest will give you minus 30. Now, if you want to be one of those guys who gets into the 1,000 plus amount of dexterity, you then want to run Black Sun in your helm. And last time I checked, Black Sun doesn't give you any resists. So you're kind of in this awkward situation where you have no resists on any of your gear, and you actually have very little life on your gear, other than, this is the thing, right? So you're like, oh, but dude, you're getting 280, 300 life from your gloves and your boots, right? But then you're not getting any on your helm. You're only getting 70 on your chest piece, and you're getting 50 on your quiver if you're using a drill neck. So you then need to suddenly get all of your resists on your belt, your 2 rings, and your amulet. Now, if you're chasing that much resists, plus also trying to get as much flat dex as possible, where is this happening? These kinds of builds want to stack flat dex on gear, and they also ideally want to get dex on jewels. So it's not like you're just gonna fill everything in on your jewels, right? So then what, are you gonna start running purities? It's just kind of awkward, right? So realistically, these boots don't actually see use in the crazy Iron Commander builds. These boots are something that you use in trappers. You use them in just average bow builds, average right side of tree builds. I would put these into most of my right side of tree bow builds. And in those kinds of builds, it will give me anywhere between 20 to 40 life. So it's going to be a 20 to 40 life pair of boots, which isn't amazing, but it is something. It's better than no life, right? So it has got some life on it. It gives me 100 life regen. The 100 life regen to me is more exciting than the immunity to burning, shocked, and chilled ground, because as previously mentioned, it helps the builds like trappers and miners who can't leech. It helps with stuff like Zealot's Oath. This is like huge. So the Zealot's Oath Fire Nova my character I was playing earlier in the league, if your Stone Golem ever died, you got screwed, right? Well, with these, you can just be running around. Your Stone Golem dies, you're not fucked. So for those kind of builds, it's amazing. For people who are on like 3.6% regen, like, oh god, Blood Rage is so annoying, these are amazing. The fact they also give you the immunity to burn, shocked, and chilled ground makes them good. But the people assuming you're going to have these and just have ridiculous amounts of life, you need to work out where the hell you're getting your resist from, because that just isn't realistic. So yeah, that is very, very cool. Now, one other thing which you kind of need to be slightly iffy of, and so someone quite rightly puts in chat, is a lot of the right side of tree builds these days are Pathfinders and Raiders. And Pathfinders and Raiders already have status element immunity. So, in that sense, it's kind of awkward because you already have immunity to those status elements on the most popular builds on the bottom right side of tree. So that then takes a massive... They're powerful, they're very, very powerful, but they're kind of awkward because when you actually look into the builds which can use them, they're a lot more limited than they seem. However, I like them. I really, really like these boots, and I would happily put them in the build I'm currently playing because it's a Deadeye. These two, I'm not sold on them. I'm sure I'll see some Reddit builds and maybe I'll change my mind. But right now, I think I'm going to be waiting for the other 13 potential unique items to come. I'm Tarke. Have a good day. Bye-bye. Now, obviously not bye-bye because, still a stream, but that's going on YouTube. So, yeah.